Bartender calls cab for drunk customer every Friday night. It was her small act of kindness in a world that had shown her precious little. Megan wiped down the weathered oak bar counter, the familiar scent of polish and spilled beer a constant in her otherwise unpredictable life. The brass fixtures gleamed under the dim lights of the corner tavern, a neighborhood establishment that had seen better days, much like its longest-serving bartender. The Friday night crowd had thinned to just a few regulars. Her eyes drifted toward the end of the bar where Mr. Calloway sat hunched over his fourth whiskey, his silver hair catching the amber glow of the hanging lights. Like clockwork, he had arrived at 7 p.m., dressed in the same pressed charcoal suit he wore every Friday, his tie loosened just enough to suggest the weight of the week he carried. "Last call, Mr. Calloway," Megan said, her voice gentle but firm. The ritual was as familiar as the changing seasons, him nodding silently, finishing his drink with a slight grimace, and her reaching for the phone behind the bar. His eyes, the color of faded denim, met hers with that same quiet dignity they always held, even through the haze of alcohol. "Thank you, Megan." His voice carried the refined edge of education that his disheveled appearance at the end of these nights could never quite erase. As she dialed the cab company, Pete's Reliable, always Pete's, Megan felt the familiar tug of curiosity. 3 years of Friday nights, and still, Mr. Calloway remained largely a mystery. She knew he worked at some downtown firm, lived alone in the old Victorian district, and never missed a Friday at the corner tavern. But the why? Why this bar? Why always alone? Why the same careful routine of 4 whiskeys before she called him a cab? Those questions remained unanswered. 20 minutes, she told him after hanging up, sliding a glass of water his way. "Drink this while you wait." He nodded, taking the water with hands that trembled slightly. Not from the alcohol, she suspected, but from something deeper. Something that lived in the lines around his eyes and the careful way he arranged his wallet and keys before him, as if establishing order in this small corner of his world was essential. Outside, rain began to tap against the windows, the spring shower turning the neon bar sign into watercolor streaks against the glass. Mr. Calloway stared at the distorted lights, his reflection a ghost among the colors. "Bad night for rain?" Megan commented, more to fill the silence than anything else. "It was raining the night she died," he said so quietly Megan almost missed it. The confession hung in the air between them, unexpected and heavy. In 3 years, this was the first personal detail he had ever offered without prompting. Megan's hands stilled on the glass she was polishing. "Your wife?" she asked, though somehow she already knew. He nodded, taking a careful sip of water. 15 years ago today. The pieces clicked into place. The suit, the Friday ritual, the 4 drinks. A remembrance, perhaps. A private memorial held in the company of strangers who asked no questions. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. His eyes lifted to hers, a flicker of surprise in them, as if genuine compassion was something foreign. "You've been calling me cabs for 3 years, and this is the first time I've mentioned her." Megan shrugged, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "People talk when they're ready, or when they realize time is running short," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Something in his tone made her stomach tighten, but before she could respond, headlights swept across the window as the cab pulled up outside. Mr. Calloway gathered his belongings with the same methodical care he always showed, leaving his usual generous tip tucked under the empty whiskey glass. "Until next Friday, Megan," he said, shrugging on his overcoat. "I'll be here," she replied, their customary farewell. Only tonight, as she watched him walk carefully to the waiting cab, shoulders squared against the rain, she felt the words carry a weight they hadn't before. She couldn't know that across town, in a spacious but sparsely furnished study, a leather-bound document lay open on a mahogany desk. On its pages, recently amended, her name appeared beneath the heading Beneficiary. Just as she couldn't know that the cancer spreading through Mr. Calloway's body had given him 6 months, at most, to put his affairs in order. All she knew was that every Friday night she called a cab for a lonely man who drank to remember, not to forget. And somehow, that simple act of kindness had become as much a constant in her life as it was in his. Megan's apartment welcomed her with the same empty silence it always did after a late shift. The one-bedroom walk-up above Mrs. Patel's flower shop was small but clean, smelling perpetually of the day's leftover blooms drifting up through the ancient heating vents. She kicked off her shoes by the door, her feet aching from the 9-hour shift. The red light on her answering machine blinked accusingly. 3 messages. She pressed play as she pulled leftover pasta from the refrigerator. Megan, it's Mom. Just checking in. The doctor adjusted my medication again. Call me back when you can. The weariness in her mother's voice made Megan's shoulders tense. The Parkinson's was getting worse, but her mother's stubborn refusal to move from the small town where Megan grew up made proper care a constant challenge. Hey sis, it's Ryan. Mom called me again about the medication costs. I know we talked about splitting it, but I'm a little short this month with Jesse's braces and all. Maybe next month? Megan sighed, mentally rearranging her budget. Her brother's maybe next month had become a familiar refrain, stretching back years now. Megan, this is Dr. Lewin's office calling to remind you of your follow-up appointment next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Please call to confirm. The pasta suddenly looked less appetizing. The lump in her breast had been probably nothing, according to the initial exam, but the doctor had wanted to be sure. At 34, with no insurance beyond the bare minimum catastrophic coverage she could afford, probably nothing, was the diagnosis she desperately needed to hear. She put the pasta back, appetite gone, and instead poured herself a glass of the same whiskey she served to Mr. Calloway. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, the responsible bartender who made sure everyone got home safely, drinking alone in her apartment at 2 a.m. The whiskey burned pleasantly, warming her from the inside as she curled up on her secondhand couch. Rain continued to patter against the windows, and she found herself wondering if Mr. Calloway was awake too, listening to the same rain, remembering a wife 15 years gone. It was strange how some customers became fixtures in your life when you worked in service. Like supporting characters in the background of her own story, there, consistent, but never fully known. Mr. Calloway with his quiet dignity. Mrs. Rodriguez, who came in Tuesdays for 1 glass of white wine and left lipstick prints on the rim. The Thursday night business crowd with their loosened ties and loud laughter. They saw her, but did they really see her? Did they notice the dark circles under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide? Did they know that every generous tip went straight into an envelope marked Mom's Meds? Did they realize that the woman who poured their drinks and listened to their stories had started to wonder if her own story would ever change? Megan took another sip, feeling the familiar burn. No, they didn't see her. And that was the unspoken contract of service work. She was the backdrop to their lives, not a player in them. Except tonight, Mr. Calloway had shared something real. One tiny piece of himself offered up after 3 years of Friday nights. It wasn't much, but it felt like a crack in the wall between server and served. A small acknowledgement that they were both just people, carrying their separate burdens through the same rain-soaked night. She fell asleep on the couch, the empty glass on the coffee table, and the rain still tapping gently at the window, like time itself asking to be let in. The next Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of spring evening that promised summer was on its way. The corner tavern's windows were propped open, letting in a gentle breeze that carried the scent of freshly cut grass from the park across the street. Megan checked her watch. 7:15 p.m. Mr. Calloway was late, something that had never happened in 3 years of Fridays. She told herself the twist of concern in her stomach was simply the disruption to routine, nothing more. By 8 p.m., she found herself watching the door every time it opened, disappointment flaring when it revealed someone else. A group of office workers celebrating a birthday. A young couple clearly on a first date, both nervous and trying to hide it. Regulars settling into their usual spots. But no Mr. Calloway. Someone standing you up, Meg? Asked Tony, the other bartender working that night, a kid barely 22 with a perpetual smirk. Just surprised. Got a regular who's never missed a Friday. Tony shrugged, unconcerned. People's lives change. Maybe he found a new bar. The thought bothered her more than it should have. She went about her work, mixing drinks, making change, smiling at the appropriate jokes. But her eyes kept drifting to the empty seat at the end of the bar, the spot that had become somehow Mr. Calloway's. At 9:30 p.m., just when she'd resigned herself to the fact that he wasn't coming, the door opened. Mr. Calloway stood there, looking more gaunt than she remembered, his normally immaculate suit slightly rumpled. But it was the unfamiliar woman beside him that caught Megan's attention. Tall, elegant, with the same silver-streaked hair and blue eyes as Mr. Calloway. They made their way to the bar, Mr. Calloway moving with a careful deliberation that hadn't been there before. Megan felt an irrational surge of relief mixed with curiosity. "Megan," he said, his voice warm with recognition. "I apologize for the late arrival. "This is my daughter, Elizabeth." Elizabeth extended a slender hand across the bar. Her grip was firm, her smile guarded. "So you're Megan. Dad's mentioned you." There was something in her tone, not quite suspicion, but assessment. Megan had seen it before from family members who encountered the peripheral characters in their loved ones' lives, trying to determine what role this stranger played, what space they occupied. "All good things, I hope," Megan replied with a professional smile. "The usual, Mr. Calloway?" He nodded, settling onto his regular stool with what looked like relief. Elizabeth took the seat beside him, ordering a club soda with lime. As Megan prepared their drinks, she noticed the daughter watching her, taking in the practiced efficiency of her movements, the easy way she interacted with other customers, the genuine smile she gave Mr. Calloway as she placed his whiskey before him. "Dad tells me you always call him a cab," Elizabeth said when Megan returned with her club soda. "That you've been doing it for years." Megan shrugged. "Part of the job, making sure everyone gets home safe." "Do you do that for all your customers?" Elizabeth's question carried an edge of something Megan couldn't quite identify. "The ones who need it." Mr. Calloway cleared his throat. "Elizabeth flew in from Boston yesterday," he explained, a subtle redirection. "She's staying for a few weeks, just helping Dad with some things around the house," Elizabeth added, her eyes never leaving Megan's face. "He's been neglecting the place since his diagnosis." "Elizabeth." Mr. Calloway's voice held a warning, but the word hung in the air between them. Diagnosis. The slight tremor in his hands, the weight loss, the careful way he moved. Suddenly it all made terrible sense. "I'm sorry," Megan said, the words feeling wholly inadequate. "I didn't know you were ill." Mr. Calloway's smile was tired but genuine. "It's not something I advertise, but yes, I've been better." Elizabeth's posture softened slightly. "I'm sorry. I assumed he'd told you, given how often he mentions this place, how often he mentions you." The revelation that Mr. Calloway talked about her to his daughter sent an odd flutter through Megan's chest. What did he say? How did he describe their relationship, if you could even call their brief weekly interactions a relationship? "Megan has been a constant in an unpredictable time," Mr. Calloway said simply, answering her unspoken question. "Sometimes that's exactly what one needs." The moment was interrupted by a call from the other end of the bar. Megan excused herself, grateful for the distraction as she tried to process this new information. Mr. Calloway was sick, seriously sick, judging by his daughter's presence and the changes in his appearance. And somehow, in the midst of whatever he was facing, her small weekly gesture of calling a cab had mattered enough for him to mention it to his family. The night progressed, busier than usual for a Friday. Mr. Calloway nursed his single whiskey, a departure from his usual 4, while Elizabeth maintained a protective orbit around him. They left early, just after 10 p.m., with Elizabeth helping her father into his coat. "No need for a cab tonight?" she told Megan. "I drove." Mr. Calloway lingered for a moment at the bar while his daughter waited by the door. "Thank you, Megan," he said, his voice low. "For what?" "I didn't even call you a cab tonight." His smile deepened the lines around his eyes. "For consistency. For treating me the same, even after Elizabeth's revelation. Pity is a heavy burden to bear on top of everything else." Before she could respond, he pressed something into her hand. A business card. Expensive stock, embossed lettering, Harrison Calloway, Senior Partner, Calloway and Walsh Legal Services. "My office number is on the back," he said. "If you ever need anything, legal advice, a reference, anything at all, please call. Consider it payment for all those cab fares." Megan started to protest, but he shook his head. "Humor an old man," he said, then turned to join his waiting daughter. As she watched them leave, Megan turned the card over in her hands. On the back, in neat handwriting, was a phone number with direct line. Written beneath it, such a small thing, this rectangle of heavy paper, and yet it felt like more than just a business card. It felt like an opened door. The Parkinsons had taken much from Eleanor Walker, but it hadn't taken her bluntness. "You look tired," she told her daughter as soon as Megan walked into the assisted living facility's small common room. Megan bent to kiss her mother's papery cheek. "Hello to you too, Mom. Don't sass me. I'm stating facts." Eleanor's right hand trembled as she adjusted the blanket across her lap. "You're working too hard," says the woman who raised 2 kids while working double shifts. Megan settled into the chair opposite her mother, taking in the increased stooping of her shoulders, the new hollowness in her cheeks. The disease was progressing, stealing her mother piece by piece. That was different. "I was younger. I'm only 34, Mom. Hardly ancient." Eleanor sniffed. When I was 34, I'd already been married twice and was thinking about a third. The familiar argument brought a smile to Megan's lips. Yes, and look how well those worked out. Her mother's laugh turned into a cough. When she recovered, she fixed Megan with the penetrating stare that had always made her feel transparent as glass. Something's bothering you. And don't tell me it's the money for this place. I know that look, and this is different. Megan considered deflecting, then sighed. Her mother had always been able to read her too well. One of my regular customers is sick. Really sick, I think. His daughter showed up last night. You're upset about a customer? Eleanor's eyebrows rose. Must be some tipper. It's not about tips. He's been coming in every Friday for years. Always sits in the same spot, always has the same drinks. I always call him a cab. It's routine. She struggled to articulate why Mr. Calloway's illness had affected her. I guess I'm just realizing how little I actually know about him, despite seeing him every week. Eleanor's trembling hand reached for her daughter's. People come into our lives for all sorts of reasons, Megan. Some stay, some pass through. Doesn't mean the passing through ones don't leave their mark. Megan squeezed her mother's hand gently. When did you get so philosophical? When they started giving me the good drugs. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. Now tell me about this follow-up appointment. The doctor call yet? The abrupt change of subject caught Megan off guard. How did you… Ryan mentioned it when he called. Said you were waiting on results. Of course Ryan had told their mother. Despite her efforts to keep the initial examination quiet, to avoid worrying Eleanor until there was something definite to worry about, her brother had let it slip. It's nothing, Megan insisted. Just a precaution. The doctor said it's probably just a cyst. Probably, Eleanor repeated, her eyes narrowing. And if it's not? Megan looked away. Then we'll deal with it. We, her mother echoed. You mean you? Because Ryan can barely pay his own bills and She gestured at herself, the tremor in her hand making the movement jerky. Not exactly in a position to help. Mom, stop. I'm fine. The doctor will call, she'll say it's nothing, and life will go on as usual. Eleanor studied her daughter's face for a long moment. You know what I regret most? All the time I spent worrying about things I couldn't control, instead of enjoying what was right in front of me. She patted Megan's hand. Whatever happens with this doctor, promise me you'll start living your life instead of just maintaining it. The words hit closer to home than Megan cared to admit. How long had it been since she'd done anything just for herself? Years of putting her own dreams on hold, first for college funds that went to her brother instead, then for her mother's care, then for the endless cycle of bills that seemed to multiply each month. I promise I'll try, she said finally. Eleanor nodded, satisfied for now. Good. Now tell me more about this sick customer of yours. Is he handsome? Megan laughed despite herself. Mom! He's at least 70. So? I'm 68. Too old to appreciate a handsome man? As they fell into easier conversation, Megan felt the knot of tension in her chest loosen slightly. Whatever was coming, with her health, with Mr. Calloway, with all the uncertainties that seemed to be piling up, at least she had this, her mother's unwavering strength, even as her body betrayed her. Later, as she left the facility, Megan found herself thinking about her mother's words. Start living instead of just maintaining. The business card Mr. Calloway had given her felt heavy in her pocket, a tangible reminder that sometimes connections formed in the most unexpected places. 2 weeks passed with no sign of Mr. Calloway. Each Friday, Megan found herself watching the door with increasing concern. His absence left a void that she felt more keenly than she would have expected, a disruption to the rhythm of her weeks that had become strangely unsettling. The third Friday after his visit with Elizabeth, Megan was midway through her shift when Tony nudged her, nodding toward the door. You're missing regulars here. Looks like hell, though. Mr. Calloway stood just inside the entrance, one hand braced against the wall for support. Even from across the room, Megan could see how much weight he had lost, how the suit that once fit him perfectly now hung from his frame. Without thinking, she hurried from behind the bar to meet him. Mr. Calloway? She said, instinctively offering her arm for support. Let me help you to your seat. He accepted her assistance with a grateful nod. Forgive the dramatic entrance. The cab driver was in a hurry, didn't wait to make sure I made it inside. As they made their slow way to his usual spot, Megan was acutely aware of how frail he felt beside her, how his steps seemed to require conscious effort. She settled him onto his stool, then quickly returned to her place behind the bar. The usual? She asked, already reaching for the whiskey. He shook his head. Just club soda tonight, I'm afraid. Doctor's orders. She prepared the drink, noting the yellowish tint to his skin, the deeper shadows beneath his eyes. "I was beginning to think you'd found another bar," she said, aiming for lightness. "Never." His smile was wan but genuine. "I've been in the hospital," Elizabeth insisted, though I told her it was unnecessary fuss. Megan set the club soda before him. "I'm sorry. Is she still in town?" "Flew back to Boston yesterday. Her life doesn't stop because mine is winding down." He took a careful sip. "She wanted me to go back with her, to stay with her family while I—" He paused, searching for the right words. "While things progress." I declined. The matter-of-fact way he referenced his own mortality sent a chill through Megan. "You want to stay in your own home." "I want to maintain what normalcy I can for as long as I can," he corrected gently. "Which includes my Friday evenings here." A lump formed in Megan's throat. She busied herself wiping down the already clean bar top. "Well, your seat will always be here." He watched her with those faded blue eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. "You received some news yourself," he said. It wasn't a question. Megan's hand stilled. "What makes you say that?" 3 years of Fridays, Megan. "I may be dying, but I'm not unobservant." "Something's troubling you." The directness of his statement, "I may be dying," made her chest tighten. And yet, there was something freeing in his honesty, in the absence of the euphemisms people usually wrapped around difficult truths. "My test results came back," she admitted. "The lump isn't cancerous, but the doctor wants to monitor it. More appointments, more tests, more bills." She hadn't told anyone else, not her mother, not Ryan. Strange that this man, this customer she knew so little about, should be the first to hear her fears. Relief softened Mr. Calloway's features. "That's good news, about it not being cancerous." "It is," she agreed. "But it scared me, made me realize how precarious everything is. My mom's care, my job, my health. One serious illness and it all falls apart." "May I ask about your mother?" Megan hesitated, then found herself telling him about Eleanor's Parkinson's, about the assisted living facility that consumed most of her income, about Ryan's broken promises to help with the costs. As she spoke, Mr. Calloway listened with complete attention, occasionally asking a clarifying question, but mostly just allowing her to unburden herself. When she finally fell silent, embarrassed by how much she had revealed, he simply nodded. "Thank you for sharing that with me, Megan. It's a heavy load you carry." "Not compared to yours," she said quickly. "Pain isn't comparative. Your struggles don't diminish because someone else's seem greater." He took another sip of his club soda. "May I offer some advice?" "Professional advice, from a lawyer who's seen too many families torn apart by medical expenses and lack of planning?" Megan nodded, curious. "Get your mother's affairs in order now. Power of attorney, advanced healthcare directive, will, all of it. I can help if you'd like. Pro bono, of course." The offer took her by surprise. "That's very generous, but I couldn't—" "Consider it a selfish request," he interrupted. "Giving advice is what I've done for 50 years. It would give me purpose, in a time when purpose is in short supply." Put that way, refusing seemed cruel. "If you're sure it wouldn't be an imposition, I'll have my assistant send over some preliminary paperwork." His expression softened. "We're more than our circumstances, Megan. Both of us." The simple truth of his statement struck her deeply. How long had she defined herself by her responsibilities, her struggles? How long had she seen Mr. Calloway as just the Friday night regular who needed a cab, rather than the complex person sitting before her now? "Thank you," she said, meaning it for more than just the legal advice. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Now tell me about your week. Any interesting customers besides a dying old lawyer?" His gallows humor startled a laugh from her. As she began recounting stories from her shifts, the weight she'd been carrying seemed to lighten, just a little. And when it came time to call him a cab an hour later, the routine felt not like an obligation, but a privilege, one small constant in both their uncertain lives. Summer arrived with relentless heat, turning the corner tavern into a refuge of air-conditioned comfort. Mr. Calloway's Friday visits became both more frequent and shorter. Sometimes he would come on a Tuesday or Wednesday as well, staying just long enough for a club soda and brief conversation before the effort of being out became too much. Each time, Megan noticed the progression of his illness, the deepening jaundice, the increasing difficulty walking, the periods when pain would flash across his face before he carefully composed himself again. Yet he never complained, never sought pity. Instead, he listened to her stories, offered quiet advice about her mother's legal situation, and occasionally shared small details about his own life. She learned that he had founded his law firm 40 years ago, specializing in estate planning and elder law, that his wife Catherine had been a concert pianist before arthritis ended her career, that Elizabeth was his only child, the result of what he called a late-in-life miracle. After years of thinking they couldn't have children. In turn, she found herself sharing more than she ever had with a customer. Her abandoned dreams of becoming a teacher, cut short when her father died and college funds were needed for immediate expenses. Her complicated relationship with Ryan, whom she loved despite his unreliability, her fear that her mother's condition would deteriorate to the point where the assisted living facility could no longer accommodate her. It was a strange friendship, formed in the liminal space between professional and personal, yet no less meaningful for its unusual circumstances. On a particularly sweltering Friday in late July, Mr. Calloway arrived looking more tired than usual. His breathing labored from even the short walk from the cab to his stool. "Bad day?" Megan asked, already preparing his club soda with an extra wedge of lime, the way he preferred it. "The worst are yet to come," he replied matter-of-factly. "But yes, not one of my better ones." She set the drink before him, noting how his hands shook as he reached for it. "Maybe you should have stayed home today. And miss our standing appointment?" "Never." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Besides, I wanted to give you something." From inside his suit jacket, he withdrew a sealed envelope and placed it on the bar between them. "Legal documents for your mother, as promised. Everything's prepared, just needs her signature and a notary. My assistant can meet you at the facility to handle the notarization." Megan stared at the envelope, emotion welling unexpectedly. Over the past month, Mr. Calloway had quietly guided her through the complex process of securing her mother's affairs, explaining options, drafting documents, making what had seemed an overwhelming task manageable. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick. "You already have. Every Friday for 3 years." He pushed the envelope toward her. "There's something else in there as well. A letter. I'd appreciate if you wouldn't read it until—" He paused. "Until after." The implication hung heavy between them. "After, when he was gone." "Harrison?" she said, using his first name for the first time. "I don't—" "Please," he interrupted gently. "Humor an old man his mysteries." She nodded, slipping the envelope into her apron pocket. "Can I get you anything else? Maybe some food?" He shook his head. "Just your company for as long as you can spare it." The bar was quiet that night, allowing Megan to spend most of her shift talking with Mr. Calloway. He seemed more reflective than usual, his stories reaching further back, to his childhood in a small Michigan town, his first case as a young lawyer, the day he met Catherine at a charity concert. "She was playing Chopin?" he recalled, his eyes distant with memory. "I knew nothing about classical music. I was there because the firm expected all associates to show up for client events. But when she played," he made a gesture with his hands, as if trying to capture something ineffable. "It was like seeing colors I'd never seen before." "Love at first sight?" Megan asked. His laugh was soft. "Love at first sound, perhaps." She thought I was an idiot when I tried to talk to her at the reception afterward. Called me a corporate drone with no appreciation for the arts. Harsh. Accurate at the time. His smile turned wistful. It took 3 months of concert attendance and a crash course in musical theory before she agreed to have coffee with me, 6 months before she'd call it dating. A year before she admitted she'd been intrigued from the start. She sounds formidable. She was. Brilliant, demanding, uncompromising about her art. Pride colored his voice. And yet, so gentle in the ways that mattered. She taught piano to underprivileged children for free, remembered the names of every server and janitor wherever she performed. Left me notes hidden around the house when she traveled for concerts. Megan could see the love still vivid in his face, undimmed by 15 years of absence. "You must miss her terribly." "Every day," he acknowledged. "But lately I've found myself grateful for the timing, that she didn't have to watch this." He gestured at himself, this slow decline. Catherine had no patience for weakness, especially her own. When the arthritis took her playing, it nearly broke her. To see me this way would have been its own kind of cruelty. His honesty left Megan speechless. What comfort could she possibly offer in the face of such loss, such clear-eyed acceptance of his fate? Before she could formulate a response, he glanced at his watch. "I should go. It's getting late, and I tire more quickly these days." "I'll call your cab," she said, reaching for the phone. As she gave the dispatch operator the address, she watched Mr. Calloway, Harrison, carefully gathering his strength for the journey home. Such a simple thing, to stand and walk and climb into a cab. Such a monumental effort for him now. When she hung up, he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Megan," he said, his voice solemn. "Thank you. For calling the cab? It's nothing, you know that. For seeing me?" he corrected. "Not the illness. Not the lonely old man. Me." The simplicity of his gratitude threatened to undo her completely. "You're easy to see, Harrison. You always have been." Something like peace settled over his features. "The cab will be here soon. Would you mind helping me outside? I find I'm rather tired tonight." She came around the bar and offered her arm, hyper-aware of how little of him there seemed to be now, how the illness had whittled him down to essence. They walked slowly to the door, his weight leaning into her more heavily than she expected. Outside, the summer night was thick with humidity, the air heavy with the promise of a storm. They stood in silence, waiting for the cab's headlights to appear down the street. "It might rain later," he remarked, looking up at the cloud-obscured stars. "Like the night she died," Megan said softly, remembering his words from months ago. He glanced at her, surprised. "You remembered that?" "Of course I did." A small smile curved his lips. "Catherine always said there were no coincidences, only patterns we were too limited to recognize." The cab turned onto their street, headlights cutting through the darkness. Perhaps she was right. When the vehicle pulled up, Megan helped him into the back seat, fighting the irrational urge to join him, to make sure he made it home safely. Instead, she closed the door and stepped back. "Next Friday?" she asked through the open window, their usual farewell. He looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing her face. "God willing," he said finally, then nodded to the driver to pull away. Megan stood on the sidewalk long after the taillights had disappeared, the weight of the envelope in her pocket suddenly as heavy as stone. The call came on a Wednesday morning, startling Megan from fitful sleep. She fumbled for her phone, the unfamiliar number sending a spike of dread through her before she even answered. "Is this Megan Walker?" A woman's voice, professional but gentle. "Yes, this is she. This is Claire Donovan, Mr. Calloway's home health nurse. I'm calling because you're listed as one of his emergency contacts." Megan sat up, instantly alert. "What's happened? Is he all right?" A slight hesitation. "Mr. Calloway was taken to Mercy Hospital early this morning. His condition has deteriorated significantly. He asked me to call you specifically." The room seemed to tilt around her. "Which hospital did you say?" "Mercy, on Westbrook Avenue. He's in the oncology ward, room 412. The nurse paused. "He's been asking for you. I think you should come quickly if you can." "I'll be there as soon as possible," Megan promised, already searching for clean clothes. The hospital was across town, a 30-minute bus ride that felt like hours. Megan sat rigid with tension, the envelope Harrison had given her clutched in her hands. She hadn't read the letter yet, couldn't bring herself to violate his request that she wait until after. But she'd brought it anyway, a talisman of their unlikely connection. Mercy Hospital rose like a monolith against the morning sky, all glass and steel and institutional efficiency. Inside, the oncology ward was quieter than she expected, the sounds muffled by carpet and hushed voices. A nurse directed her to room 412 with a sympathetic smile that only heightened her anxiety. Outside his door, Megan hesitated. What right did she have to be here? She was just a bartender, someone who called cabs and listened to occasional stories. Not family, not even a close friend by conventional standards. Before she could retreat, the door opened and Elizabeth Calloway stepped out. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Megan, you came." Her voice held surprise and something else, relief perhaps. The nurse called. "I can go if it's not appropriate." "No?" Elizabeth touched her arm briefly. "No, he's been asking for you." "I just needed a moment." She gestured vaguely, and Megan noticed the redness around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. "It's happening quickly now." The simple statement hit Megan with physical force. "I'm so sorry." Elizabeth nodded, composing herself with visible effort. "He's lucid but very weak. The doctor says it's a matter of hours, maybe a day at most." She held the door open. "Please, go in." Megan stepped into the dimly lit room, the antiseptic hospital smell overlaid with something medicinal and unfamiliar. Harrison lay in the bed, eyes closed, his skin waxy and yellow against the white sheets. 4 lines and monitoring equipment surrounded him, beeping softly in the quiet. As if sensing her presence, his eyes opened slowly, focusing on her with effort. "Megan," he whispered, his voice a shadow of itself. "You're here." She moved to his bedside, fighting to keep her expression calm despite the shock of seeing him so diminished. "Of course I'm here. Where else would I be?" A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "It's Wednesday, not our usual arrangement. I think we can make an exception." She reached for his hand, careful of the IV line. His skin felt paper thin, cool to the touch. "Did you bring it? The envelope?" he asked, each word clearly costing him effort. Megan nodded, producing it from her bag. "I haven't read the letter yet. You said to wait." "Good. That's good." His eyes drifted closed briefly, then opened with renewed focus. "I need to explain something to you while I still can." She leaned closer to hear his weakening voice. "You don't need to explain anything. I do." His fingers tightened slightly on hers. "My will. I've named you in it." The statement was so unexpected that Megan could only stare at him. "What? Why would you—" "Let me finish," he interrupted gently. "It's getting harder to speak." She fell silent, watching as he gathered his strength. 3 years ago, when Catherine's anniversary first brought me to your bar, I was in a very dark place," he began. 15 years without her, and the pain hadn't lessened. "I was considering—" He paused, ending things on my own terms. The implication sent a chill through Megan. "Harrison," he squeezed her hand weakly. "Let me finish. That night I drank more than I should have. Was in no condition to drive. You called me a cab without judgment, made sure I got into it safely. A small kindness, but it reached me somehow. Made me feel seen when I'd been invisible for so long." His breathing had become more labored, each word carefully measured. "I came back the next Friday. And the next. Each time you remembered my drink, my name. Called me a cab without being asked. Those Friday nights became an anchor when I had none." Tears burned behind Megan's eyes, but she blinked them back, determined not to break down while he was trying so hard to speak. "When I received my diagnosis last year, I had no one but Elizabeth. No close friends, no other family. Just my daughter who lives across the country with her own life, her own family." A shadow of pain crossed his face, quickly controlled. "I needed to put my affairs in order. And when I thought about who had made these last years bearable, who had shown me consistent kindness without obligation, it was you, Megan. But I just did my job," she protested weakly. His smile deepened. "You did much more than your job. You treated a lonely old man with dignity. You remembered his preferences. You listened when he finally found the courage to speak about his wife. You saw him as a person, not a sad story or an obligation." The monitor beside his bed beeped, and Harrison closed his eyes briefly, waiting for a wave of pain to pass. "The letter explains everything," he continued when he could speak again. "My attorney has all the details. But I wanted to tell you myself, to see you understand that this isn't charity or obligation. It's gratitude, Megan, for making the end of my life better than it might have been." She was crying now, unable to stop the tears. "You did the same for me. The legal help with my mom, the advice, the friendship. Then we're even," he whispered, his voice fading. "The best kind of relationship." The door opened quietly, and Elizabeth returned, accompanied by a doctor who moved immediately to check Harrison's vitals. Megan began to withdraw her hand, but Harrison held on with surprising strength. "Stay," he said. "Please, both of you." Elizabeth came to stand on the opposite side of the bed, taking her father's other hand. The two women exchanged a glance over his frail form, acknowledgement, understanding, a shared recognition of what he had meant to each of them in different ways. "I'm tired," Harrison murmured, his eyes drifting closed. "I think I'll rest now." "We'll be here," Elizabeth assured him, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Friday night," he whispered, so softly Megan had to lean close to hear him. "Call me a cab one last time." She pressed his hand gently between both of hers. "I promise." His breathing eased into sleep, the monitors continuing their quiet vigil. Megan and Elizabeth remained on either side of him, connected by the man between them, by the love he had inspired in such different ways. Harrison Calloway died peacefully at 4:17 the next morning, with Elizabeth holding his hand and Megan asleep in the chair beside his bed. The nurse woke Megan gently, her face compassionate as she delivered the news. The next days passed in a blur. Elizabeth, recognizing Megan's genuine grief, included her in the small, private funeral arrangements. There was no formal service. Harrison had been specific about that. Just a brief graveside gathering where he was laid to rest beside Catherine. Megan stood slightly apart from the handful of attendees, mostly colleagues from Harrison's law firm, and a few of Elizabeth's family members who had flown in for the occasion. The day was clear and warm, summer at its zenith, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of freshly cut grass from nearby maintenance workers. After the final words were spoken and the small crowd began to disperse, Elizabeth approached Megan, her expression solemn but composed. "Dad's attorney would like to meet with us tomorrow," she said. "About the will?" Megan shook her head. "I don't need to be there. Whatever your father left me, it's not necessary. I never expected anything." "That's precisely why he wanted you to have it," Elizabeth replied, "and why I'm not contesting any of it, despite what some might consider an unusual bequest to someone he knew for such a relatively short time. You're his daughter. Everything should go to you." Elizabeth's smile held a hint of her father's quiet dignity. "Dad provided for me long ago. What he's left for you, it's what he wanted. Please respect that." Put that way, refusal seemed impossible. Megan nodded reluctantly. "What time tomorrow?" 10 a.m. at his office. "I'll text you the address." Elizabeth hesitated, then added, "Have you read the letter yet?" "Number." He was very specific about waiting until after. "Perhaps tonight then, before tomorrow's meeting." Elizabeth squeezed her arm briefly, then turned to rejoin her family. Alone in her apartment that evening, Megan finally opened the envelope Harrison had given her. Inside were the legal documents for her mother, as promised, and a sealed letter addressed simply to Megan. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the heavy stationery. "Dear Megan, if you're reading this, then I have finally completed my journey. I hope my passing was peaceful and that it did not cause you undue distress. Death is, after all, the most natural thing in the world, though we spend our lives pretending otherwise. Tomorrow, you will meet with my attorney, Marcus Walsh, regarding my will. You will learn that I have left you a substantial portion of my estate, specifically my house in the Victorian district and a trust fund established in your name. The house is fully paid for, the property taxes covered by the trust for the next 20 years. The remainder of the trust is intended to provide you with financial security and, perhaps more importantly, options. I imagine you are wondering why. Why would a man you knew primarily as a customer leave you such a bequest? The answer is simple, though it may be difficult for someone as selfless as you to understand. You saved my life, Megan. Not dramatically, not in a way that would make the evening news, but surely steadily Friday night after Friday night. When I first came to the corner tavern, I was a man looking for a reason to continue. The anniversary of Catherine's death had become increasingly unbearable each year. That night, the first night you called me a cab, I had made certain decisions about how the evening would end once I returned home. But something in your kindness reached me. The simple human decency of ensuring a stranger got home safely, the dignity with which you treated a broken old man. It was enough, just enough, to make me reconsider. I returned the following Friday, curious if the experience had been anomalous. It wasn't. Again, you remembered my order, engaged in pleasant conversation, called me a cab without being asked. Again, I found myself unwilling to disappoint the one person who seemed to expect I would return the following week. And so it continued, this unlikely anchor in my otherwise empty existence. Friday nights with the bartender who called me cabs, who remembered my name, my drink preference, who never pried, but always listened when I finally began to speak about Catherine. When my diagnosis came, I found myself facing not the welcome release I might once have sought, but a genuine sadness that my time was limited. Life had become precious again, in no small part because of the simple human connection you provided. The bequest in my will is not charity, Megan. It is recognition of a profound truth, that sometimes a life is saved not through grand gestures, but through consistent small kindnesses, through being seen when one feels invisible, through mattering to someone, even in the most ordinary of ways. I have watched you struggle with the weight of responsibility you carry, your mother's care, your brother's unreliability, your own deferred dreams. I have seen how you put others before yourself, always. This gift is meant to ease that burden, to give you choices, to allow you the freedom to pursue the teaching career you once dreamed of, to secure your mother's care without working yourself to exhaustion, to build a life that contains joy as well as duty. My attorney will explain all the practical details. The trust is structured to provide both immediate funds and long-term security. The house needs some updating, but is structurally sound and in a desirable neighborhood. You may live in it, sell it, or rent it out as you see fit. My only request, not a condition, merely a request, is that you use some portion of this unexpected windfall to pursue something that brings you happiness. Catherine always said that a life without passion is merely existence. She was right, as she was about most things. Thank you, Megan, for the cab rides, for the conversations, for seeing an old man as worthy of dignity and kindness, for making the end of my life infinitely better than it might have been. With deepest gratitude, Harrison Calloway. P.S. Check the library in the house when you first visit. Behind the collected works of Dickens, you'll find Catherine's journals. I think she would have liked you to have them. Perhaps her words will provide the same comfort to you that your presence did for me. Megan sat motionless, the letter trembling in her hands, tears streaming unchecked down her face. The enormity of what Harrison had done, what he had given her, was almost impossible to comprehend. Not just the material bequest, substantial as it clearly was, but the revelation of what their Friday ritual had meant to him. How something so simple, so much a part of her job that she had never thought twice about it, had quite literally saved a life. Outside her apartment window, a summer storm had begun, rain tapping against the glass in a gentle rhythm. She thought of Harrison's words the first night he had mentioned Catherine. It was raining the night she died. Now it was raining on the night she finally understood the full measure of their connection. Perhaps Catherine had been right. Perhaps there were no coincidences, only patterns too vast for us to fully comprehend. Megan carefully refolded the letter and returned it to its envelope. Tomorrow would bring meetings with attorneys, paperwork, the practical details of an unexpected inheritance. But tonight, in the quiet of her apartment with the rain as witness, she allowed herself to fully feel the loss of Harrison Calloway, not a customer, not a benefactor, but a friend who had seen in her what she had seen in him, a person worthy of kindness, of recognition, of being truly seen. 1 year later, the Corner Tavern hadn't changed much in the months since Megan had last visited. The same weathered oak bar, the same brass fixtures, the same mix of regulars and newcomers seeking respite from the outside world. Tony spotted her first, his face breaking into a genuine smile as she approached the bar. "Look what the cat dragged in," he called, abandoning the drink he was mixing to come around and give her a quick hug. "Damn, you look good, Meg. Teaching agrees with you." Megan laughed, returning the embrace. "Thanks. It's good to see you too, Tony. What can I get you?" "On the house, obviously. Club soda with lime?" she replied, settling onto a familiar stool. Not her usual spot when she had worked here, but the one at the end of the bar, Harrison's spot. Tony raised an eyebrow but prepared the drink without comment, sliding it across to her with a flourish. "So, Professor Walker, how's life in the world of higher education?" "I'm hardly a professor, just an elementary school teacher." But the pride in her voice belied the modesty of her words. 6 months into her new career, and the joy of it still felt miraculous some days. Still, you did it. Got your teaching certificate, found a job. Living the dream. Tony leaned against the bar. "And the big Victorian house? Still settling in?" Megan nodded. "Finally got the last room painted last weekend. Mom loves it, says the garden is what keeps her Parkinson's from progressing faster. And your brother? He's still Ryan," she confirmed with a rueful smile. "But he's trying. Comes by to help with Mom twice a week now. I think having her live with me instead of in the facility has been good for both of them." They chatted for a while longer, Tony updating her on bar gossip, Megan sharing stories from her third-grade classroom. Around them, the Friday night crowd ebbed and flowed, creating that particular symphony of conversation, laughter, and clinking glasses that had been the soundtrack to so much of her life. As the evening progressed, Megan found herself watching the door, a habit she couldn't seem to break. No one would be coming, she knew that. And yet, every Friday night, whether she was at home grading papers, out with friends, or, like tonight, visiting her old workplace, a part of her still expected to see Harrison Calloway walk through the door at precisely 7 p.m., immaculate in his charcoal suit. "You still think about him, don't you?" Tony asked, following her gaze to the empty doorway. "Every day," she admitted. "Especially when I'm at the house. I kept his study exactly as it was, his books, his desk. It feels right somehow." Tony nodded. "He must have been something special to do what he did for you." "He was..." Megan traced the condensation on her glass. "But not for the reasons people think. Not because of the inheritance. Because he showed me that sometimes the smallest gestures can mean everything to someone. That kindness isn't just nice, it's necessary. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken when Tony was called away to serve other customers. Megan sat alone at the end of the bar, sipping her club soda, watching the Friday night ritual unfold around her. Couples on dates, friends celebrating the end of the work week, solitary drinkers nursing private thoughts, all of them connected in this moment, in this place, whether they realized it or not. At precisely 9:45 p.m., the time she had always called Harrison's cab, Megan finished her drink, left a generous tip under the glass, and stood to leave. Tony caught her eye from across the bar and raised his hand in farewell. She returned the gesture with a smile, then made her way to the door. Outside, the spring night was cool and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Megan paused on the sidewalk, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of memory and the lightness of gratitude in equal measure. A cab pulled up to the curb, not for her, just coincidence. As the passenger door opened, Megan found herself remembering Harrison's words from his last night at the bar. "Call me a cab one last time?" She had kept that promise in her way, not by literally calling a cab, but by being present in his final hours, by hearing his story, by accepting his unexpected gift not as charity, but as recognition of a connection that had mattered deeply to both of them, though in ways neither could have anticipated. As Megan turned toward home, toward the Victorian house with its garden where her mother spent sunny afternoons, toward the study where Harrison's presence still lingered among his books, toward the life that had opened before her like an unexpected door, she felt a sense of completion, of a circle closing even as new ones began. The bartender who had called cabs for a lonely man, the man who had left her a legacy far greater than property or money, the knowledge that sometimes saving a life requires nothing more than seeing it, acknowledging it, treating it with simple human dignity. Every Friday night without fail for 3 years. Neither of them could have known where such a simple ritual would lead. Neither of them could have predicted how profoundly their lives would intertwine through the smallest of kindnesses, repeated with consistency, offered without expectation of return. But perhaps that was the greatest lesson Harrison had left her, that the most meaningful connections often begin in the most ordinary of ways. That transformation doesn't always announce itself with fanfare, but rather slips in quietly through the simple act of being seen, being known, being treated as if you matter. Because you do.